Well, good morning, South Hills. How are you guys doing? Good morning to those of you guys that are watching online, joining us online. One of the great things about being a part of Orange County is that between the 9 a.m. and the 10:30 service, it's like a 20-degree difference. There was people in blankets and parkas in the first service, and it's getting a little warm out here during this service. So it's so good to have you guys. My name is Chris Kretzu. I'm the campus pastor. Thank you guys for joining us in person, online, however you're joining us today. I appreciate that. Man, it's fun to start a new series. This series we're calling How to Kill a Relationship, which just feels like wrong. It's like a weird way of saying this, but we all have these ways that we unintentionally damage our relationships. And so we're going to be talking about one of those each week. Have you guys, just a kind of question, have you guys ever gotten a new job and spent the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks of that new job just trying to look busy, like trying to look like you knew what you were supposed to do? You didn't get all the training yet or whatever the situation might be, but there's a sense that you couldn't actually do very much work even though you were there full time, whatever it was. It's kind of this weird period of time. Maybe your boss would walk by. I had this happen once a number of years ago. My boss would walk by. It was like the week that I started, and I had nothing to do. And I would hear him walking by, so I would just like move papers from one side of my desk, like just conveniently to the other side of the desk right as he passed by the door. Like, I'm totally worth the hire. It's like this really odd, just trying to figure out how do I make sure that I know that I will be able to do this job well, but there's also this weird time frame of learning what exactly that even means. I've got a little secret for you guys. About half of you will know that this is true, and this won't be a surprise for you, but this same exact feeling of trying to like prove that you are not a bad choice, trying to look busy so that you are seen as valuable and a part of the team, this is the same exact thing that every dad feels for like the first month of a kid's life. Every single dad is like, okay, I got to look helpful. I got to look like I was not a poor choice as a mate. I got to, a mate. That's a great way. Very romantic. This sense of, like, okay, let me rinse the bottles again. And it's just like the mom has so much to do and works so hard and tirelessly. And you just want to make sure, like, you pull your weight. You want to do your part, but you're still just learning. You're trying to figure it out. You don't want to make eye contact because you don't want her to know that you have no idea, even though she already knows you have no idea. We want to make sure that we look busy. I remember the first few weeks of our first child's life, Mason. It was about 3 weeks in. Right in the middle of like sleep deprivation and all the torture that comes along with that stage. And I sleep very, very heavily. Like it's more like a light coma. Like when I go to sleep at night, like it takes violence to wake me up. And my wife has always been a light sleeper. And then we have this baby, so she's waking up. And it was about 3 weeks in, and it was like middle of the night. Mason starts crying, and she wakes up and somehow wakes me up. And she says something to me, but I'm like, coming out of that coma, like a little bit groggy, trying to come to. I'm waking up and I don't understand what she says, but I want to make sure that I'm valuable and that I'm worth it. I want to be proven like, oh, I'm a good husband. Like I'm here to help. I'm going to do whatever it is. And so I'm just like trying to act like I'm more awake than I am. Like, what? One more time. What was that? What did you need? And she says it again. And I cannot understand what she's saying. And at this point I'm like, oh, if I have to ask a third time, like, this marriage might be over. No, I was kidding. There's like this sense of like, man, I want to know what it is I can do to help. I want to know how I can jump in. I'm like, I'm so sorry, babe. Can you say it one more time? And she says it very slowly and very clearly. And in that moment, I realized that she was speaking in Spanish to me. She was so exhausted that she went back to her first language and was just spouting off instructions in Spanish. And it was like the greatest gift because I was like, ha, it's not me, it's you. You're the problem. I was kidding. But it was hilarious and frustrating and exhausting. And I think that so many of us have this kind of experience. We say things in a way that our friends, our partners, our spouses, our families, we say things in a way that they cannot understand. Now, we may not be literally speaking a different language, but sometimes we say things we don't mean. We say things that, the words mean one thing, but we actually mean something else. I got a couple examples for you guys here, these coded messages or phrases. The first one here, if you guys, I don't know if you've ever heard or seen this one, the phrase, I'm fine. Does it ever really mean that someone's fine? Like, especially when there's a period on the end of the message, like in the text messages, when there's a period, it's like, there's a punctuation. There's emotions involved. The phrase, we should get together sometime. People say this all the time. There's a pastor's conference I would go to every single year. It's the same week, every single year, the same place. And there was a guy, I've known who he is for about 12, 13 years. And we would pass in crossings. He's another pastor. And we would always see each other this same week at this conference. And every single time I was like, man, we have got to get together. And I was like, yeah, let's hang out. He's like, I don't have your number. Can you send me a text with your number, and then I'll reach out and we'll make it happen? I'm like, no problem. So I sent him a text. This is Chris. Let's hang out. Well, next year comes. I see him again. And he's like, oh, we have got to hang out sometime. I'm like, okay. He's like, can you send me a text with your number? And then I'll text you. I'm like, okay. So I go and I put up, because I know I still have his number. So I type in his name. And you know how you can see like the last text you sent to somebody? It was 12 months ago on the exact same day at the exact same time. I was like, oh, this is ridiculous. So I just sent him. But we say these things, the idea of, I don't know why you can't find a good blank to date, when it's like you might actually have like a pretty good idea why they can't find someone. That might be too sensitive. The phrase, has anybody ever said, I'm on my way? And it's like, you're not even out of the bed. It's like, I'm on my way to getting dressed. I'll be there in about an hour. It's like just way not even accurate. And then the phrase, no worries, when in fact, whatever happened now has you crippled with worry and anxiety. It's like, oh, no worries. I'll figure it out. It's like Kathy when volunteers bail at the last minute. Like, no worries. I got it covered. I picked on Kathy both services, and I don't think she was here to hear it either time, so I love that. She's probably pulling slack somewhere. No, I'm just kidding. We all have these phrases. We all have these things that we say, these coded messages. And then to make matters worse, this is only one half of the equation, because this is just in what we're saying. This doesn't even start to touch on what other people are hearing, what other people are hearing us communicate. Besides the fact that I'm saying something, someone else has to hear it. We always think that we are communicating clearly, but study after study shows we're actually filtering and assuming all kinds of things. I made this really incredible graph of these two people. I don't know if you guys can see that as a reflection. Can you guys see it okay? The sun's out in a way that it was not in first service. So humans, on average, we think at about 400 words per minute. Some of you guys are overachievers, and you got like 1,000 going at any given time. We think at 400 words per minute, but we speak on average closer to 100 words per minute. So all of the things that you think in your mind, you kind of whittle that down, and you create like this verbal shorthand of all of the thoughts that you have in your mind, and you say a quarter of what it is that's in your mind. But it's actually not even just that easy, because you have the thoughts that are in your mind, and then before you actually speak the words, they go through a filter, and there's all kinds of different filters. It goes through a filter of what your expectations are, a filter of your emotions, whether in general or at that moment. It goes through a filter of what your needs are, or your hopes, your fears. All of these thoughts are filtered through these ideas, and then it comes out in a quarter of the words that you're actually thinking through. And again, that's only half of it, because then it translates over and it goes to another person where they hear through their mouth. Apparently, the diagram isn't totally biologically accurate. They hear these 100 words, but then they go through their filters of their expectations and their emotions and their needs and their fears and their hopes. And then they are thinking 400 words a minute also. And so they add 75% more context to what it is that you're saying. There is this crazy amount of translation and coding and communication way beyond, and we're not even talking about nonverbal communications or any of these other kind of things. We speak in codes in ways that we don't even realize. We don't even recognize how much this is happening. We have these thoughts that don't always make it to the words, and even when it does make it to the right words, they're filtered through emotions and feelings and fears and all kinds of stuff. Communication is hard. There's a lot of misunderstandings. Just yesterday, we had some errands to run, and Ez wanted to go to the store by herself and then come back and get the boys and then run errands with the boys. And I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. I've got I had these really great graphics I had to design, very artistic. And I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. And I had been up in the morning, so I was just still like lounging, like totally wasn't ready to go at all. Anyways, so she comes back from her first errand, and she gets back to the house, and the boys are ready to go. I'd gotten them ready, and I had gotten dressed, which was a real gift. It was only like 2 p.m. I'm just kidding. I was dressed, but I still wasn't planning on going. These are thoughts that I had in my mind. Obviously, they never made it into words. And so she said, okay, I'm going to go ahead into the car, and I got to get this gift wrapped to be able to drop it off. I'm like, okay. And so I sit down, I keep working on these exquisite graphics. And about 20 minutes later, she comes back into the house and is like, are we going to go? I was like, have you been sitting in the car for 20 minutes? She's like, yeah, you got dressed. You're clearly ready to go. I was like, no, this is just like, I was just trying to be a clean, functioning adult. I still am not going, but there's these things that are just constantly missed. One of the primary ways to kill a relationship is by communicating in code. We communicate in code, I think sometimes without even recognizing it. It's filtered again through our hopes, fears, expectations. We think that we're being clear, but somehow it's still kind of translating in some sort of coded language. But sometimes we communicate in code because we are afraid to be vulnerable. Sometimes we communicate in code because we don't want to have to risk too much. We don't want to have to put ourselves out there to the point where we might get hurt. We might get taken advantage of. We might be rejected. Dr. John Gottman writes a ton on this, and he calls these bids for attention. He talks about how humans are constantly sending out these bids, these requests for attention. And we do it in small ways and in big ways. And a lot of times we do these in really kind of hints and these small little ways because we are afraid of becoming vulnerable. We don't want to risk getting hurt. I don't know how many of you guys out there are a part of the Bachelor Nation? One? Okay. Ed, I saw that hand go up. Thank you, Ed. Bachelor Nation, I don't recommend it, but I watch it every week. But it's hilarious because you have these people and they're all in very serious relationships. And their relationship is a lot different than everybody else's relationship with the same person. And they end up in this conversation and inevitably they say something along the lines of, I've just never been so sure that I might possibly definitely be falling in love with how much I like you. And it's like this weird random like, what are you trying to say? Like, can you just say it? But there's a risk. There's this fear. On that show, there should be a lot of fear, but there's a fear in becoming vulnerable, of getting hurt by someone we love, we care about. Sometimes we communicate in code because we don't want to upset someone. A lot of times we use coded language, we use different phrases, we avoid conflict because we don't want to rock the boat, we don't want to cause tension, and a lot of times we avoid conflict in our relationships and we just kind of settle for like an artificial harmony, a fake sense of peace. Like everything, it just feels, we're not angry. We're not fighting. So that is the best it's going to be. This is a healthy relationship now because we're not screaming at each other. We're not totally disagreeing over everything. And so we have all of these different ways that and there's probably a million more, but whether it's intentional, whether it's unintentional, the language, the way we communicate, there's challenges that come with this. And many of us may feel like, and I would put myself in this boat. There's been times in my marriage and my friendships where I felt like, is it possible for this to get better? Is there ever a time that this won't be difficult? And the answer is no. I don't know if there is a time when it won't be difficult. It's two humans, two broken, beautiful, wonderful humans that are marked with the image of God and that also have a sense of brokenness. And there will always be some sort of challenge in the communication. There may be times when it's good and times when it's worse. There's a spectrum, but I don't think that we can ever just remove the challenge of communication. And so James is the half-brother of Jesus. He writes a letter, and we find it in the scriptures in the New Testament, the book of James, and he wrote this letter to a group of people that really struggled to balance out what they said and what they did. He wrote it to a group of people that really struggled because they said things a lot of times that didn't match up with their actions. They would say things that were hurtful or cruel. They would be arrogant. They would be, they had all kinds of challenges. He wrote this letter to a group of people. Do you know who it was? Christians. James wrote this letter to Christians because it does not matter how much you trust Jesus, we still have a part to play in becoming transformed. His Spirit gives us the power to be transformed. God's Spirit is what enables our hearts and our minds to be transformed, but he partners together with us, and we have got to put in some work. We don't put in work to be saved. We don't put in work to be loved, to be valued, but there is an effort that we put into growing and preparing our hearts and our minds to be changed. And so James writes this to the church that is struggling so much. He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be," and can we read this out loud together? I just want everybody to say these phrases. Everyone should be. Yes. You guys sound excited. Those are everybody's favorite verses, right? Like, gosh. Quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. He says, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word that is planted in you, which can save you. That's interesting because he says human anger doesn't produce the righteousness that God desires. Now, when we hear the word righteousness, we tend to think of it in kind of this spiritual framework because we don't really use like righteous very often in our day-to-day language. We kind of only understand this in a Christian or a faith context. But the word righteous, there can be a spiritual meaning there, but the word righteous, it really has to do with kind of this justified, that you are justified in your approach. And so what he's saying is that your anger will not actually be justified in the way that God desires it to be. But this is like one of our favorite things to tell ourselves, is that like, I am rightfully angry. I am justified in my anger. I'm justified in my frustration. Have you guys said this phrase, righteous anger? Which I don't want to like totally go off track today, but righteous anger is this thing that we think is like this, we're invited to be able to have this, and so we use it all the time, or at least the word. Righteous anger is actually not something that the scriptures tell us that we can have, which is a whole nother sermon, which we're not going to talk about today. But what James is saying is human anger does not produce righteousness. It does not put you in the right place. Your anger over a situation, it does not make it's okay for you to be angry in that scenario. James gives us 3 kind of instructional phrases or commands, and I just want to look at them in the last kind of 10 minutes or so that we have here. I want to look at these phrases and see what does it look like for these to help us overcome this challenge that we have in our communication, this challenge of communicating in code. And here's the thing, whether you are a kid hanging out in our students section, shout out to the South Hill students over there, whether you are a parent that has a kid over there in the students section, whether you are a husband or a wife, whether you are a friend or a coworker or a neighbor or just a part of this church, every single one of us deals with communication challenges in every one of our relationships. So we can all, regardless of our status, space in life, we can figure out what this looks like for us. So the first thing that he says, my dear brothers and sisters, everyone should be quick to listen. Quick to listen. Studies consistently show that communication is 60 to 90% listening, which when I first read that, I was like, 60 to 90% feels like a really big spread, like a 30%. But it's like, okay, let's just assume it's 60. So communication is more listening than it is speaking. Like if we can just assume that is true. Communication is more about what we hear, how we listen, than it is about what we say. And if we're honest with ourselves, most of us don't even really listen to understand. We listen so that we know when it's our turn to talk. We listen so we know when it's our turn to like attack back. We listen so we have ammunition to be able to use later. We listen for reasons, not anything having to do with understanding. Sometimes we listen just to be able to get past this conversation to the next thing. We're so busy and distracted, and our lives are so quickly moving that I think a lot of times we're not quick to listen. We're actually just trying to listen quickly. It's like this sense, like I've got a child who loves to tell me the details of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And yokai and whatever else is out there in the world, and he knows everything about all of it, legitimately. And he wants me to know everything about all of it too. And so sometimes I find myself like, Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And then the 17th series, and then season 9 came out, and then but I think that we do this with our spouses too. We do this with our friends. We do this with our coworkers where we're not quick to listen, quick to give them our attention to hear what they're having to say, but we're actually just trying to like, okay, like you want to say something to me, so let me stand here so that you can say it to me. We're told to be quick to listen. And I think that there's 5 bad listening habits, and we actually learned about these. We did something called the marriage course in the fall. I know some of you guys did that course with us, but they talked about these 5 bad listening habits that all of us do. The marriage course is actually going to be starting up in 2 weeks. If you guys are dating, seriously dating, engaged, or married, it's a great 7-week course. Starts the week of Valentine's Day. I think it's like the 17th is a Thursday night or whatever it is. But anyways, they talk about these 5 bad listening habits. The first one is we can often become disengaging. We start paying attention to a different conversation in our head. We get distracted. Someone is talking to us, and instead of listening, we actually start disengaging and focusing on other things that are going on, like your phones or the TV or whatever that smell is coming from the kitchen or whatever might be happening. We disengage. The second one is that we are reassuring. Now, reassuring feels like a positive thing. It's like, yeah, who wouldn't want to be reassuring? But they actually talk about how sometimes we start to reassure people as they're articulating pain, frustration, difficulties, and we're reassuring them because we're uncomfortable with what it is they're articulating. We're reassuring them, and we're not allowing them to voice the negative emotions, the pain, the frustration that they're doing. We're saying, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It's all good. Don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. And when we do this, we're not actually listening, hearing what they have to say. The third one is giving advice. Now, this is my superpower in conversations. My wife sat in the first service and just cackled at me when I started talking about this, because none of these are things that I get right. I don't have any of these figured out or kind of like, yeah, I'm perfect at all of these things, so let me tell you all how to be perfect. It is so difficult for me to listen to her talk about frustrations or challenges or whatever it is and not to just immediately try and solve the problem. And the best part about it is I can't even solve my own problems, but I'm very confident that I know how to solve her problems. We try and give advice. We go off on a tangent. We take the conversation over with our own agenda. A lot of times we interrupt is the 5th one. We don't let someone finish what they're trying to say. We don't give them the time to complete what they want to say. These are bad listening habits, and we all wrestle with these things. I like to think that I'm a good listener. I really do. But the reality is that I don't get to decide if I'm a good listener or not. It doesn't matter how much I think I'm a good listener. How well you listen is determined by how heard the other person feels. How heard your spouse feels, your friend, your coworker, your kid. They are the ones that get to decide if you are a good listener, if you are listening well. And so we might feel like we're a good listener, and maybe for some of us, the best thing that we could do this afternoon, at some point, tomorrow, this week, is to have a conversation and say, hey, do you think that I'm a good listener? Is there ways that I could be a better listener? Is there ways that I could be a better listener to hear what you have to say? An author, David Augsburger, said this. He said, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. Being heard is so close to being loved that for most of us, it is indistinguishable. There is no difference. When we feel like we are heard, when we feel like someone hears what we're saying, understands, knows us, it feels as though we are loved. It is indistinguishable. It is so important for us to be quick to listen. Then James says we need to be slow to speak. The second one is slow to speak. Let's say it together, all together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Nailed it, Ricky. I like it. Slow to speak. Research. I was reading a bunch of this stuff this week, again, because I have to teach you guys things about this. I can tell you the times I get it wrong, but I can't tell you how to do this right from my own personal experience. This one study that I was reading this week, it says that the average person only listens for 17 seconds before interrupting. We listen for 17 seconds before we jump in with our thought, with our solution, with our response, with our reassuring of like, oh, it's okay. You don't need to even think about it anymore. Don't feel bad about it anymore. It's all going to work out fine. Don't worry at all. We jump in, we interrupt. The average person only listens for 17 seconds before interrupting. And if you have kids and you're trying to have a conversation with your spouse, that goes down to like 3 seconds. That's not an actual statistic. I made that up from my own life. I think if we're honest with ourselves, being slow to speak is the most painful part of the commands that James gives us here. Because, this idea of like, yeah, I'll listen to what you have to say, but also I have to be slow to speak. Like, what's the point of listening if I don't get to say what I want? What's the point of listening if I don't get to respond immediately with everything that I think, with everything that I feel, with my opinion, my perspective on this? We love to give advice. We love to put in our own 2 cents. We love to hear ourselves talk. And I think that we all feel the desire, and I think a lot of us feel like we deserve to be heard. And so how dare I limit you from hearing my incredible opinion and perspective? How dare I not share what I thought, what I think, what I know? We love to talk, but we're commanded to be slow to speak. There's an important piece of this process of being quick to listen, being slow to speak, pacing ourselves. Some of the conversations may be harmless, but what James talks about, especially as he goes on into James chapter 3, and we don't have time to read all of it, but in James 3, he goes on and he spends the first half of this chapter talking about how powerful the tongue is, how powerful our words are, that they're like a rudder on a ship. They're this small part, but they steer the entire ship. He says in verse 6, he says, the tongue is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body. It sets the whole course of one's life on fire and is itself set on fire by hell. Right? It's like, geez, James, calm down. But it's true. Like, it's so true. We have all said things, and there's times that we have said things. You guys ever, does anybody here, you don't have to raise your hand. Does anybody drive faster than the speed limit and then a turn comes up? And you're like, oh, I don't think I'm going to be able to slow down in time to make this turn. And you try and slow down, and it's like, I could see how much this car can handle, or I can just loop around again. The same thing happens with our speech. We are so quick to speak that oftentimes we say things that cut, that hurt, that disenfranchise, that push people away. We've got to be slow to speak. Proverbs talks about this. It was funny. I was going to read just like a list of 15 verses out of Proverbs that literally talk about being slow to speak. It says it over and over again. It's almost like the wisdom writer said, you know what they need the most wisdom about? Being slow to speak. Just holding on for a minute. That's where they could really use some help. But this is what he says in Proverbs 17. He says, the one who has knowledge uses words with restraint. Which I think our intuition is, well, if I have knowledge, then I should tell you my knowledge. I should bless you with what I know. I should be able to speak into it. He says, the one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered. Even fools are thought to be wise if they keep silent, and thought to be discerning if they hold their tongues. He says, man, if you have knowledge, if you have wisdom, then you should show restraint in how much you speak and what you say and how you speak to people. It's usually the opposite for us. It's a challenge for us. I heard one person talk about, they said that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and so we should listen twice as much as we speak, which I thought was funny. There's this old theologian that said it this way, and it just sounds so angry and crotchety, I had to include it. He says, men have 2 ears and but 1 tongue, that they should hear more than they speak. The ears are always open, ever ready to receive instruction, but the tongue is surrounded with a double row of teeth to hedge it in and keep it within proper bounds. It's like, wow. You're like really just painting a picture here. But there is just over and over and over again this reminder that our words have so much power to do good, to bless, to care for, to love, but so much power to hurt to cause problems, to increase pain, and we have got to be intentional about the words we choose to speak. And the only way we can be intentional is if we are slow to speak. We have got to slow ourselves down so that we can use our words the right way. Ephesians 4, we looked at this a couple weeks ago. It says, speak the truth in love. There's this invitation to grow in Christ-likeness and the way that we're able to be intentional with the words we use. So communication is speaking and it's listening. There's two parts. I'm going to say things. I'm going to get it wrong. It's going to be confusing through all of my filters, all these things. You're going to hear things. There's two pieces of this puzzle. I really love cheesy. I love most movies. I have a very low bar when it comes to movies. I'll watch almost anything and enjoy it. One of my favorite things about action movies is that there's like this trope that happens where at some point they always need to launch nuclear missiles. And you guys know what happens when you have to launch nuclear missiles? There's two people that come in, and then they reach down their shirt and they pull out this like keychain. It's got a key. These two people have a key, and they have to go on separate sides of the room and put the key in, and they count down from 3, and they turn the. Have I painted the picture? I love that. The Hunt for Red October. They do it in the submarine. Okay. This is a lot what communication is like. And I think what happens is we like to say, like, you launched the nuke in our relationship. You did this. You didn't listen. You said the wrong thing. You caused this problem. But there is a communication reality that we have got to understand that we each play a part. And it's not letting one person off the hook, but we have got to say there are two humans involved in this conversation. One of us is speaking, one of us is listening, and we have got to start to learn how to be quick to listen, slow to speak. And then there's a third piece that I think is so crucial, and James says, slow to become angry. I used to think that what James was saying is that if you're quick to listen and you're slow to speak, then you will become slow to be angry. But he's actually giving 3 different commands. He's saying, be quick to listen, be slow to speak, and be slow to become angry. And so I spent time this week trying to figure out, what does this mean? How can you be slow to become angry? What does that look like, practically speaking? And so I kind of just reverse engineered it in my mind so that I could try and understand. And so I was like, okay, well, what is it? How can I be angry quickly? Like if I'm supposed to be slow to become angry, then what's the best way to get angry fast? So by not listening, by saying every thought that comes to my mind, and by assuming the worst of people. That's the best way to fast track anger. Not listening to what they're saying the first thing that comes to your mind, and just assuming the worst of people. I think a lot of times we choose to believe that someone we love, someone we trust, a kid, a friend, a spouse, a partner, someone that we care about, we trust with our lives. A lot of times we assume and we take what they said and the way it made us feel, and we assume that they intended to hurt us. We never even consider that maybe there is a miscommunication, maybe there's a misunderstanding, maybe there is a miss happening here. We internalize it instead of clarifying it. And I think that the way that we become slow to be angry is if we spend twice as much time listening. And you guys may be familiar with this. There's passive listening, just like what you guys are doing. Like you're listening to me talk and laughing at all the appropriate times and all this. And then there's active listening. There's reflective listening. There's these 2 different realities of listening. I think that, and I don't know that this is what James was doing exactly, but it feels like it makes so much sense. He's saying you need to be quick to listen. You need to be slow to speak, and you need to be slow to become angry. And the best way to do that is by repeating back, by reflecting back what you heard them say, by taking the time. So you listen to what they say, you are slow to respond, and then you clarify what you heard in the conversation. You clarify, this is how you made me feel. Is that what you meant to do? This is how that sounded to me. Is that the way you intended for it to sound? This is the way that I heard that. This is the impact that those words had. Is this what you intended? You get to clarify what you heard them say. I think only in this time are we able to communicate with people in a way that we love them We value what they have to say, and it also ensures understanding. Reflective listening is hearing what someone says and then making sure that we understand what they mean. Let me be quick to listen. Let me be slow to speak. And let me make sure I understand what you mean so that I don't fly off the handle, so that I don't take what you say and immediately just allow that to wound me. That's a loud plane. Some are quiet. Let me just clarify, is this what you intended to do? Because a lot of times what happens is we hear what someone says and we either allow it to hurt us, cut deeply in that moment without clarifying. And I do this all the time. I know I just give the impression like I'm just like the manliest man in the world, but I am sensitive. I am emotional and sensitive, and I have always struggled with this. I have always struggled with taking the first thing, the first version, the way that I hear someone say something, and I like set that in stone. I'm like, this is the way that they think about me. This is the way it is. This is the way it will always be. It's always been a challenge. A lot of times we allow this to wound us without clarifying what they mean. And then I think another thing that people do is they take it and they say, oh, all right, I see what you did there. I'm going to save this ammunition for later. And in like 2 weeks from now, you're going to do something, and I'm going to be like, bam, remember when? Remember when you said this to me? That's why. And we save these things up. We save these words. We save these attacks up, and we use them as ammunition later. We've got to be slow to become angry. And the way that we do that is by making sure we understand what people mean. Clarifying this. The reality is for us, and that I don't think that there's a way for us to remove communication challenges from our relationship. So what we're invited to do is to follow this roadmap that James gives us. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. We take this roadmap and we overlay that on the challenges we have in our lives, in our relationships, in our friendships, with our kids, as parents, as spouses, whatever it might be. We overlay this. And this is how we navigate healthy communication in a way that doesn't ultimately destroy our relationships. Now, are there 1,000 other challenges in relationships? Yes. Are there other communication issues? Yes. We cannot solve all of it, but I think there's an important piece of us understanding I need to slow down so that I can be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. James isn't leading us to some sort of life hack to solve all of our communication problems. He's leading us to this intentional way to navigate the communication challenges we have. It's not new to us. The first church that he was writing to was dealing with these same things. I think we're being invited to speak in a way that others love to listen to us, and to listen in a way that others love to speak to us. It changes the way we engage with the people around us. Let's pray together.